Hey folks! I get a lot of comments on my channel from people looking to break into the glam sector, otherwise known as galleries, libraries, archives, and museums, and I thought I would put this little video together offering some advice on how to do that. Before we dive into the advice portion of this video, I feel it's important to address that this field is incredibly difficult to get into, and it usually doesn't pay very well. Like, at all. Speaking from my own personal experience, as well as that of my colleagues over the years, this is an incredibly difficult field to get into, especially if you're low income or from a low income background. Unfortunately, the nature of this sector favors those that are better off financially. You need a degree to get into this field, which is already a barrier to a lot of people, but on top of that, you may also be required to take on unpaid work, because that is how a lot of the experience is gotten in this sector when you're just starting out, and not everyone can afford to work for free. If you're curious, I have a whole other video where I talk about the ongoing issues with museums, their staff, workload, and pay, which I highly recommend you watch so you have a rough idea of what you're getting into. But if you go and watch that video and then decide that you still want to go through with this, come back here and I'll dive into my advice shortly. I don't mean to start this video on such a grim note, but I really don't want to sugarcoat glam. The work is really interesting, the people are lovely, but the pay is usually awful, and it can be extremely stressful working in a chronically understaffed sector. I also just want to mention that this video is not meant to be like a step-by-step how-to guide. This is meant to be general advice because everybody's experience is a little bit different. Different institutions and different positions want different things. So this is more just meant to be a general guideline to kind of get you pointed in the right direction. So grab a coffee or a cup of tea or perhaps something stronger and we'll jump into it. I thought a great way to start this video would be to tell you my story of how I got into this field. I come from a low-income background, and I originally wanted to do archaeology, so slightly glam adjacent, so I went and got my Bachelor of Arts degree in anthropology and classics. I struggled a lot during my undergrad. I had a lot of unchecked mental illness rampaging through my brain. And I also didn't have any help with paying for school, so that was not a fun time. With that being said, I was privileged enough to be able to stay at home while I was going to school, so I didn't have to worry about rent. I just had to scrounge up the money for tuition. So I worked pretty much full-time through my undergrad in order to pay for school, and in retrospect, I kind of wish that I'd just gotten student loans because it was a very difficult couple of years. After I graduated with my bachelor's degree, I didn't know what to do. I had worked a lot of blue-collar jobs, and I, again, didn't really have that guidance. I didn't know how to break into the field. I didn't know where to look for jobs. And as a result, I kind of stagnated. I stayed at the same awful job for way longer than I should have before I finally decided to go back and get my graduate diploma in cultural resource management. The graduate diploma was almost a master's degree, just basically without a thesis, and that is something else that I wish I had done, is I wish I had just gone for the master's degree, but you know, it's worked out fine for me so far, but it definitely would have helped in certain job applications. Once I finished my graduate diploma, I figured out where to start applying in order to get the sort of job I thought I wanted, and it finally happened. I achieved my dream of becoming an archaeologist. Except, I didn't like it. What I realized is that I had always dreamed of becoming an academic archaeologist, doing research, applying for funding for the projects I wanted to dig on, and basically doing archaeology for the sake of learning and discovery. What I ended up doing was commercial archaeology. So I ended up in the bush in northern British Columbia, where I worked on pipelines and hydro dams. It was a great experience, and I don't regret it at all, but it was not in line with what I wanted to do. So I quit and ran home with my tail between my legs. After a few months back working an awful blue-collar job again, I had an interview in England at one of my favorite historic sites in the entire world, my dream job. This was going to be amazing. Except I didn't get it. A few weeks later, I interviewed at a little historic house museum called Point Ellis House, and I didn't get that one either. But I was throwing resumes out at jobs I actually wanted, and things were actually moving. I was actually getting interviews. People were looking twice at my application, and it felt like a change in the winds for me. So I did landscaping for a while, and I actually really enjoyed it. I learned a lot about plants and construction, and I found it very satisfying. I was also working part-time at a pub in a position that was somewhere between door girl and bouncer, which was certainly a time in my life. But I had these degrees and this archaeology experience that was sitting and gathering dust, and I wanted more. So I kept looking for jobs in glam. But I got my break because Point Ellis House cold called me 6 months after my initial interview, asking if I wanted the job after all, because the person that they'd offered the job to was leaving, and, well, the rest is history. I was there for a very happy 3.5 years. While I am no longer at Point Ellis House, I have found myself in a different part of the glam sector that I am really enjoying. I am not going to be sharing my new position on social media because I am trying to maintain a level of distance between my life here online and also my career. And I feel like I'm entitled to a certain level of privacy, so I hope that you can respect that. Maybe once I've moved on from this place, I'll, tell you stories and things and talk about my experiences. But for now, none ya business. But all in all, I'd say I'm doing pretty okay for someone who started out as a broke, clinically depressed undergrad student. But enough about me, let's talk about what you can bring to the sector. Having perused many a job board, I can confirm that pretty much the bare minimum requirement for one of these types of jobs is in fact a bachelor's degree, though they are pretty flexible about what type of bachelor's degree you get. Anthropology, history, art history, political science, linguistics, pretty much any of the humanities will get you in through the front door of glam. As you know, I have a double major in anthropology and classics, but I have worked with people with all different types of degrees over the course of my career. I think that depending on if you have like a very specific place in mind that you want to work, having a specific degree might give you an edge over other candidates. For example, if you want to work in a dinosaur museum, having a paleontology degree would be a lot more helpful than, say, an art history degree, but for the most part, a humanities degree will get you in through the front door, if nothing else. Of course, having a Bachelor of Arts degree is the bare minimum for getting into this field these days. However, you can take this a little bit further to give you a little bit of an extra edge by getting a master's degree or a doctorate if you like suffering. Most roles that are higher up the food chain in glam, such as curators, archivists, executive directors, etc., will require a higher level of education. So keep that in mind with, if you are really dead set on becoming a curator, do some research and figure out exactly what you need to make sure that you can get that edge against other candidates. With all this being said, post-secondary education on its own is not enough to get you a job in this field, which is why it is incredibly important to get work experience either through internships or volunteering as soon as possible and as varied experience as possible, which brings me to my next point. Working or volunteering or interning in a museum is great, and that definitely will add to your resume. But if you are working in housekeeping, or if you're working in construction, or if you have an admin job, or if you're working fast food, please don't be hard on yourself or feel bad or feel like you're not making progress towards your dream job in glam. There are tons of transferable skills that might surprise you. So I have somewhat notoriously held a very wide variety of employment over the years. I've been a landscaper, I've been a housekeeper, I worked maintenance, I worked at a pub, I worked fast food at Tim Hortons for several years, I did retail at a frozen food store and also a toy store, and I have taken skills from all of these different positions and carried them with me into glam. When I worked at Point Ellis House, we had a tiny team. We didn't have a lot of staff, and I ended up doing a lot of weird stuff. I did basic maintenance on the historic house. I filled in for the gardener at one point for several weeks. I had to engage with the public and use my customer service skills to give tours and talks to really infuriating people sometimes. And those skills did not come from my bachelor's degree. If you have a master's degree, that's great. But in the past, when I've been on museum hiring committees, I generally look at your schooling to make sure that you have the appropriate amount, and then I'm going to spend most of my time actually looking at your experience. Now, the jobs that I've had might not seem very relevant to my job as an assistant curator or my current unnamed position, but there are tons and tons and tons of skills that I have brought with me. Working retail has helped me engage with the public and offer decent customer service. It's helped me develop social skills and empathy. My time in landscaping and maintenance has helped me learn how to use basic power tools and the basics of just maintaining a space. If you want to work in an art gallery or a museum or anything that might have to do with exhibit fabrication, it's going to be very important that you know how to use basic power tools and how to measure. Even having an admin job, a desk job, is extremely valuable in glam because having the ability to sit and work at a desk, being able to file and organize is a skill. Basically, there are tons of transferable skills that will be extremely useful in glam that you might not even realize that you have, so don't sell yourself short in the interview or on your resume. Last year, I was temporarily out of the sector and I was feeling really down on myself. I was working an admin job that I really didn't like, but I began to realize that there were a lot of different skills and things that I was doing that were going to be extremely transferable and useful to a potential future employer. And it worked out great for me. So if you are also out of the field right now and want to get back in, be patient with yourself and take a look at where you currently are and see what you can use and what you can use on your resume and how to make that work for you. There are tons of ways to bring your experience to the table in glam. It's all just about wording it in the right way and learning how to sell yourself and advocate for yourself, which I will admit is also a skill in itself. Since I was unemployed for about half of last year, I feel like I've gotten pretty good at writing resumes and cover letters, especially considering I have not one, but 2 jobs in the sector. So here are my quick and dirty cover letter and resume rules. First off, write a cover letter. If they give you the opportunity to attach a cover letter, write a cover letter, even if they don't explicitly ask for one. If you just submit a resume and other people are submitting cover letters, your resume and your entire application is going to go right to the bottom of the pile. Number 2, get to the point. When it comes to your cover letter, get to the point as quickly as possible and as few words as possible. Number 3, don't use passive voice. You are a hard worker with an eye for detail. Be firm and positive in everything you say. Number 4, keep a master resume. If you have lots of experience and you're not sure what to keep or what to cut, then keep this master resume with all of your experience on it, and then pick and choose from that what is relevant to the job that you are applying for, and then send that resume to your potential future employer. As I've mentioned, I have had tons of jobs, and I find this immensely helpful. Number 5, use the job description. The job description is a blessing. They're telling you what they want. If you are having a hard time selling yourself, look through that list of skills and experience that they expect, and then sell yourself on those individual points. Final piece of advice is do not let low self-esteem get in your way. You are a god, and they should be honored that you even bothered to apply. Speaking of advocating for yourself, My final piece of advice is not as crucial to getting hired, but I still think it is incredibly important, whether you're in glam right now or you're still trying to get into it. If you want to get into glam, show up. If you want to work in an art gallery, get your butt down to those exhibit openings and see if they need volunteers for events. If you want to work at a museum, go check out your local historical society and chat with staff and the docents. If you want to work in an archive, well, go down to the archive and do some family history research. Learn how to use a microfilm reader. Go to these places and chat with anybody and everybody who will give you the time of day. Networking is a scary thing, especially if you're just starting out. But I promise you this, the people that work in this sector, for the most part, are pretty fucking cool. It's a whole crowd of nerds and it's lovely. Networking and just showing up has gotten me through so many doors that I didn't even know existed. And you know, it's gonna be scary at first. You're not gonna be good at it. Nobody is. But it will help you navigate this field. Also, if you already have a job in the field and you are still somehow watching this video, continuing to show up is just as important. Support your colleagues, support other museums, show up to those weird art gallery openings, go to the archives and do some research. Just show up. The community that I've worked with has been an absolute blast, and I feel very lucky to be a part of it. And I hope that wherever you're at in your glam journey, I hope that this did offer a little bit of advice and hopefully a little bit of hope. I sincerely wish you the best of luck, my friend. Being a menace.